Welcome to King Said So, Africa's one land, one language, one currency, one army on King Said So. Africans can unite. Your Pan-Africanist podcast. Enjoy.
You're welcome, SG. Thank you.
Gwaza mkonto gwaza. Jigijela mkonto jigijela. Happy birthday, President Jacob Zuma. Happy birthday. Happy birthday, President Jacob Zuma. Happy birthday. Osiama Zumeno se. Osiama Zubaba weto. Osiama Zumelo se. Sama Zubaba weto. Ozuma osihola yo. Ozuma osihola yo. Ozuma osihola yo. Zuma osihola yo. Osiama Zumelo se. Sama Zubaba wetu. Osiama Zumelo se. Sama Zubaba wetu. Ozuma osihola yo. Ozuma osihola yo. Ozuma osihola yo. Ozuma osihola yo. Amanda. Long live President Jacob Zuma. Long live. Sipilele, Ngamalala, Sipilele. Anyele, President Jacob Zuma. Anyele. Ripilele, Ngamalala, Ripilele. Amanda. Away, two. Sabanga kakhulu inkomo iKensilera Leboga. Thank you very much, Program Director, who is a member of the National High Command, Commander Luther Libelo. We want to take this opportunity first to greet our President in absentia, President Jacob Gedleyihlekisa Mhlanganyela Zuma, and send our birthday wishes on behalf of the entire organization Umkhonto weSizwe and on behalf of majority of voters in the people and the Republic of South Africa. Because Umkhonto weSizwe represents majority of people and majority of voters in South Africa. We will of course illustrate that with the process that we're engaged in the courts of law, but also we're going to decisively illustrate that Umkhonto weSizwe represents majority of the people in South Africa when we go to the 2026 local government elections and the 2029 general elections, where Umkhonto weSizwe is going to record a decisive victory. We want to greet the ex-combatants, military veterans of Umkhonto weSizwe, the Liberation Army, of the forces that come from APLA, and all the military veterans from all the fighting forces that fought for total freedom and emancipation. We want to greet the leadership of Mkhonto Wesizwe Women's League, which in terms of the program that was adopted by the National High Command is supposed to launch in August 2025. It's led here by the National Coordinator Lindiwe Charlie. Mkhonto Wesizwe Youth League is currently holding a program in Kwamashu in eThekwini. The leadership, majority of them are there, but we've got the leadership of the province here with us. Mkhonto Wesizwe Students Movement, which is the fastest growing student movement in South Africa today, and winning majority of the students' representative councils that are taking place. Want to greet the leadership of Manda Ashu Workers Union of South Africa. So MAUSA is a union that organizes workers, mostly those who work in the expanded public works program, the EPWP. So if you are a worker in EPWP, even if that job was given to you by councillors of other parties, you must know that there is the largest union that represents workers in EPWP, and it's called MAUSA. It's associated with Mkhonto Wesizwe. We also want to acknowledge Mkhonto Wesizwe people with disabilities. So Mkhonto Wesizwe National High Command, as part of building Mkhonto Wesizwe as a revolutionary movement, we have decided and resolved to constitute a desk that is going to have presence at ward level, at sub-regional level, regional level, provincial level, and have independent national leadership to specifically look on issues of people with disabilities. So we have a structure of people with disabilities. We also want to acknowledge the leadership of the Progressive Civics Congress, PCC. So PCC is not a political party, it's a civic organization. It's a civic organization that must be bigger than SANCO. You must take note, leadership of PCC, that was saying it must be bigger than SANCO. PCC must exist in each and every village, in each and every township, in each and every informal settlement. And it must deal with civic issues. PCC must not be associated with wrong elements in Mkhonto Wesizwe. It must be a civic organization that deal with issues of the communities. We also want to acknowledge all the leadership structures of Mkhonto Wesizwe, members of parliament in the National Assembly, as Comrade Des and the Chief Whip are here, but also the leadership that is deployed in the provincial legislature here in the Gauteng province. And we want to greet the many councillors that continue to grow of Mkhonto Wesizwe, that before we even participate in local government and government elections, every time there's a Wednesday of by-elections, you are quite assured and guaranteed that Mkhonto Wesizwe is going to come with one or two councillors. As we said, before 2026, Mkhonto Wesizwe will be having a higher number of councillors, ward councillors, than political parties that contested the 2021 local government elections. We also want to greet Abafundisi, those who are organized under the Mkhonto Wesizwe interreligious movement, but also those who are members of Mkhonto Wesizwe in their own right. Because we have got an organization in Mkhonto Wesizwe called Mkhonto Wesizwe Interreligious Movement, whose leadership is still going to be fully appointed representative, Bishop Zondor of all provinces, gender balance and all faiths. We want to also acknowledge Abelaphi bendabuko. They constitute a very important component of Umkhonto weSizwe, the leadership of the zones and sub-regions, the leadership of regions, the provincial detachment of Gauteng province, and want to congratulate upfront the leadership of Gauteng for having organized this birthday celebration of President Zuma here in Gauteng with very little, if no resources. So that is a demonstration of leadership that knows what it is doing. We also want to acknowledge the servants from the African Transformation Movement, the ATM, which is our strategic ally. So if you want to know what is the relationship between the MK and ATM, you must just understand the simple fact that when the ballot is printed in 2026 and 2029, ourselves, Umkhonto weSizwe, and all members and supporters of ATM, so vota ndawonye. That is the strategic alliance and unification of all the progressive forces that we're taking. But most importantly, comrades, want to greet and acknowledge the ground forces of Umkhonto weSizwe, who are the lifeblood of this organization. We are not going to have an organization without active ground forces that do work of the movement, and want to greet the people of South Africa who have joined us through different models and modes to interact with us. I want to specifically acknowledge Professor Sipho Siepe, who is going to speak today here as part of countering the narrative around President Jacob Zuma. Comrades, in all provinces today, the 12th of April, which is the birth date of President Jacob Zuma, we have got programs and different speakers and activities that are beginning to speak about the life and times, the revolutionary contributions of President Jacob Zuma. For many years, as a revolutionary, as a freedom fighter, even as a head of state and government, there have been so many reactionary and counter narratives that wanted to portray President Zuma as incapable, as not knowing what he is doing. And the reason why such was sustained over a long period of time is because President Zuma has never been a project of the white capitalist minority system. There is not a single handler under apartheid, post-apartheid, even when President Zuma was in prison. There is not a single handler who can say that they handled President Zuma and they told them or told him what to do. So all provinces are countering the narrative that seeks to denigrate, that seeks to erode the contribution of President Zuma in the struggles against apartheid, colonialism, and in the struggle for total emancipation. Comrades, some of us, just in the recent past, are very fortunate to work very closely with President Zuma. Although there is history which we can talk about elsewhere, but one thing that we can confirm, 5 features that define President Zuma, is that, one, he is a humble servant of the people. And that is what makes him great. There is no one who can ever rise to greatness unless they are humble. President Zuma is the most humble of leaders. And you see on how he interacts with everyone. Wherever he is, he talks with everyone irrespective of social standing, irrespective of age, irrespective of class, irrespective of religious affiliation, irrespective of whether that person has got money or not. President Zuma listens to each and every person that speaks to him with maximum respect. That is a demonstration of humility of President Zuma. Number two is that President Zuma is highly knowledgeable. You know, President Zuma is one of the most knowledgeable political leaders. There are so many people who have gone to schools and received certificates who even now do not even have a quarter of the knowledge that President Zuma has about the issues that affect our people. Also about what is happening in the continent. Also about what is happening in the world. He has got a far much better understanding of the global balance of forces than many other people who play a role in those spaces. But also President Zuma is very decisive. He takes decisions when he realizes that this is a wrong thing. When he realizes that this is not legitimate, it's not genuine, he takes decisions. He doesn't wait for tomorrow. He takes decisions on things that have to protect the interest of the people. The other aspect that defines our president is that he is a revolutionary through and through. He does not sacrifice principle on the altar of political convenience. He doesn't shift because he is speaking to someone else. He is very consistent on revolutionary principles. He is the most consistent, number 5. He is the most consistent defender of the Freedom Charter. Not just the defender of the Freedom Charter, but also did everything else in his power, even as head of state and president, to achieve the aims and objectives of the Freedom Charter. Part of the reasons why President Zuma started Umkhonto weSizwe is because he knew that those who are leading the former liberation movement, the African National Congress, have abandoned the Freedom Charter and will not take the road of defending the Freedom Charter. Some of us were fortunate in October 2023 to get a political presentation and discussion on why Umkhonto weSizwe as a party must be formed to represent majority of our people. In that discussion, President Zuma highlighted two most important things. One, he spoke about unity of the progressive forces and illustrated a simple fact that for many centuries now, for many decades, we as black people, the African majority, the people who look like me and you, have been under a system of colonial conquest. Whatever you can wish, even if you can listen to a motivational speaker or read motivational books that says that I'm not conquered, all the material conditions and illustrations about us black people here in South Africa is that we are still a conquered and defeated people. That is shown by a simple fact that we do not own our own land. Majority of the land is still in the hands and control of the colonial invaders, the colonial settlers, and their descendants. We are not in control of our own identity. We are still under the cultural domination of the settlers. Our wealth, our mineral wealth, is still under the hands of the colonial settlers. Our spaces, everything that defines us, is controlled by the colonial settlers. And President Zuma says the reason why in that situation is because in our wars of resistance against colonialism, we did not fight as a unified whole. The colonial invaders, they fought us in different battles. They were numerically, in terms of the numbers, they were far fewer than all of us. And to illustrate that, those of you who have studied history properly, go and check the battle which the oppressed majority won, was the Battle of Isandlwana. And in that battle, we were able to defeat the white settlers because numerically we were far much bigger than them. We had superior capacity to resist colonial invasion. But the fact that all other battles we fought as small and unviable tribes and clans, that is why we got to be defeated and subjected to colonial rule, which is still a reality to this day. Colonialism has not yet been defeated. Why? Because black people have been fighting in small corners. And that is when he said then that we need to unite all the progressive forces to fight for total emancipation. And that is the agenda that we understood very well, that what role are these small political parties playing when you know that you have demonstrated over whatever number of years that you can't take political power? Why do you still want to exist as a separate political party instead of consolidating and pursue a bigger cause for total emancipation? And he said that Umkhonto weSizwe must therefore become a movement for unification of all genuinely anti-colonial, anti-racist, progressive forces to realize total freedom. And in October 2023, the white parties and their puppets were already forming something called Moonshot Pact. That time, President Zuma says that don't pay attention to this Moonshot Pact. He says, what I know now is that the whites are going to take over the African National Congress. At that time it did not look possible He says, I know now that the whites are going to take over the ANC and they're going to form government together, and then they will continue to oppress us like they've been doing for many years. They are going to actually make oppression to be even far much more harsher on all of us. Long before there were the fake discussions on whether there must be government of national unity or so-called, President Zuma saw it in October, even earlier than that the ANC is going to merge with the Democratic Alliance to further protect the interests of the white minority. And we, in that discussion, said, let's go and contest as different political parties that we must later on get to reunite to fight for our total freedom. So, comrades, don't ever listen to anyone who will say, no, President Zuma doesn't know anything. He knows properly what he's talking about. Do you know, in my other work when I was still growing up in my 20s, I used to work as part of the political educators of the South African Communist Party and COSATU and all its affiliates. And on several occasions, even before the Polokwane conference of the ANC, where President Zuma was elected decisively as the president of the ANC, he will come to conduct political education for a lot of COSATU affiliates. And the extent and depth of knowledge that he would give, you will realize he will make exact references to very complex manuscripts. You will speak without any reference to anything. The first part of the Communist Manifesto that speaks about that the history of the hitherto existing society is a history of class struggle. He will speak clearly about that and still be able to explain that as to what it means. He would speak with eloquence as to what dialectical materialism is. He will define what science is. Those of you who have watched the several videos where he speaks about science and scientific politics, he defines science and he simplifies it for everyone else to understand. He would say that science is knowledge that is gained through observation, critically proven, assessed, and found to be true beyond any reasonable doubt. And we ourselves as students of the revolution, we got to understand that much more clearly. You know, in September last year, when Mkhonto Wesizwe was adopting the constitution of Mkhonto Wesizwe, he spoke at length about the global balance of forces. And part of the things that President Zuma was saying then, last year, he said that if these people knew what is coming, they were going to intensify our trade relationships with our friends in the Brics bloc, because when he realized that the West is taking a different shape, he is the one who went to join BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. It became BRICS because of President Zuma and the addition of South Africa. Last year already he already foreseen that the West is going to behave in the manner it is doing now. He said that if there was leadership in this country, they would be intensifying our trade relationships with our friends. Because he could foresee just what was happening. I thought we must just highlight those key values. But let's talk about President Zuma, so that the MK students movement, the Youth League, and the young people of South Africa and the generations to come, just who are we talking about? Biography, we speak about President Zuma. He was born exactly 83 years ago, on the 12th of April 1942, in Nkandla. So Nkandla is not the name of his home state. Nkandla is a very huge area, it's a municipality in the King Kotayo region of KwaZulu-Natal. The area, specific area that President Zuma was born in is called KwaDaKwaDunuze. So those who can translate that can translate as to what that means. And he spent most of his youth and early stages in KwaDaKwaDunuze. But at the age of 17, he joined the African National Congress. Because when he joined the African National Congress in 1958, 1959, it was still the only fighting instrument in the hands of black people. Black people did not have a vehicle to fight for their emancipation. There was no any other instrument to fight for total emancipation. He then joined the African National Congress. He actually says that when he was joining, I heard him say that myself, that he was so fervent to join earlier that he had to not give his correct age so that they could allow him to join the African National Congress. He later on joined the South African Communist Party, recruited by one of the great trade unionists called Moses Mabhida, who was the General Secretary at some stage of the South African Congress of Trade Unions, SACTU, who also became the General Secretary of the South African Communist Party. So President Zuma, amongst others, is a product of General Secretary Moses Mabhida. President Zuma was, in 1963, when he was joining Umkhonto weSizwe, the Liberation Army. Now let's understand this clearly. Umkhonto weSizwe, the Liberation Army is launched on the 16th of December 1961 with a clarion call which starts with a question of, there comes a time at a period of a nation whether you decide, when you have to decide whether you submit or you fight. And the decision of Umkhonto weSizwe, the Liberation Army, was to fight. Umkhonto weSizwe is launched officially on 16 December 1961. And already as part of the first consignment of recruits into Umkhonto weSizwe, the Liberation Army, part of those included President Jacob Zuma in his early 20s, in his late teens, early 20s. But you have got people at the ages of 18, 19, 20 was still saying, no, I want mama for this, mama for this, mama for that. By that time, President Zuma was willing to take up arms to fight, to kill for the revolution of our people. And he was then arrested in 1963 at the age of 21 and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was then taken to Robben Island for exactly 10 years. And he spent the 10 years in Robben Island, not just as a prisoner, also as a student of the revolution, as a student of what should be done, what is to be done. Amongst his many teachers in Robben Island was Comrade Harry Gwala. He speaks, President Zuma speaks fondly and memorably, vividly about the political schools that will be run by Comrade Harry Gwala in Robben Island. And he was in Robben Island at the same time as the time of the Rivonia trialists. But Robben Island was divided. There were those who were arrested in the 60s later, were separated from the Rivonia trialists of Nelson Mandela, Govan Mbeki, Walter Sisulu, Andrew Mlange. But the divisions, the sections where President Zuma was, used to always consult with the leadership of the Liberation Forces or other section of Robben Island. So he always recounts, I know this firsthand, of a discussion which took years on whether the African National Congress is socialist in character or capitalist in character. And the section where President Zuma was discussed over many years wrote a document and sent to the other side that please resolve this question. And then they came back after more than a year and said the reason we couldn't come back to you is because even ourselves were not found each other as to just whether we are socialist in character or capitalist in character. But one thing that we can affirm is that our struggles as of now are defined by the aims and objectives of the Freedom Charter. So the Freedom Charter has been a clarion call, a uniting perspective of all the movement that fought against apartheid and colonialism. Do you know the African National Congress was never a threat to the colonial and apartheid government until the adoption of the Freedom Charter. Until the adoption of the Freedom Charter that said that no government can claim authority over the people unless it is based on their will. There was no threat on the apartheid government until a Freedom Charter that said the mineral wealth beneath the soil, the banks, and monopoly industry shall be transferred to the ownership of the people as a whole. That is why when what was called the Treason trial happened, when the leaders of different progressive formations were arrested, when they were taken to court, the prosecutors exhibit one in the evidence of treason was the Freedom Charter. To say that you advocate for this communist document, you advocate for this document which wants to take away white domination over the economy, white domination over society, white domination over political power of South Africa. So Exhibit 1 in the court of law in the Treason trial was the Freedom Charter. And that is the ideals that President Zuma stands for. Make no mistake, you can go and listen. All of us now have got access to the so many perspectives and the interviews that President Zuma does. When he was in Ghana on the 7th of January 2025, on the 8th, he conducted an interview with Channel 1 TV. You must attentively listen as to how he places the Freedom Charter at the center of our struggle as umkhonto wesizwe. You must listen to the interview he did substantially with RT, like Russia Television, and how he places at the center of our struggle the Freedom Charter. And why is it relevant is because it has been a clarion call for all the revolutionary forces. So if you have not yet come across the many other documents and perspectives of umkhonto wesizwe, just go and read the Freedom Charter and understand what it says. Our Constitution now says, amongst other perspectives that are going to drive the agenda of umkhonto wesizwe, will be the Freedom Charter. So President Zuma understood the Freedom Charter and its essence when he was imprisoned for 10 years in Robben Island as a political prisoner. He was released in 1973. And in that intervening period, he then got married to Makumalo. It's very important to say that. And then 1973, got married. 1974, he then led the African National Congress underground formations in the Natal province. In 1975, he went to Swaziland. He was going there for a mission. He was not going first to be exiled for the many years where he was exiled. He was going on a mission with an understanding that he's still a newlywed young person. Just going into Swaziland and had to come back, but when he got there, he was then instructed that he must remain in Swaziland. That is when his exile years began. He spent all the years from 1975 until the early 1990s in exile. He was a chief representative of the African National Congress in Mozambique. He led the intelligence department of umkhonto wesizwe, the Liberation Army. He trained and received majority of those who went to exile after the June 16, 1976 uprising. So you know, after the June 16 uprising here in Soweto, there was an outflux from South Africa of exiles who went to join umkhonto wesizwe, the Liberation Army. And a substantial number of those were received and trained by President Zuma. Trained them politically and trained them militarily with an understanding of what later on got to be said by Thomas Sankara, that a soldier without proper ideological and political training is a potential criminal. So throughout his life, he got to do that work. And then when the African National Congress and other liberation movements were unbanned, they then came back to South Africa. In 1991, the African National Congress held its conference in KwaZulu-Natal, in Durban, Westville. President Zuma was elected as the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, DSG of the ANC. His SG was someone else, I forgot his name, he comes from around here. And he knew then that it was a mistake for a liberation movement to elect whoever was his SG when he was a DSG. But he remained with humility. So here's a situation, 1991. He is a national official of the African National Congress. Despite that, in 1994, when the democratic dispensation is ushered in, he was leading the Southern Natal component of the three regions of the Natal province. And then he subsequently became the chair of the Natal province. But when elections happened in 1994, 27 April, he is an official of the ANC. People get elected, they go to parliament. President Mandela says to him, come in and form part of the national cabinet. He says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm still here in the province. He then, with humility, participated in the government of KwaZulu-Natal, which was led by the IFP. That demonstrates humility, comrades. That even when you have got strong struggle credentials, even when you know that you have been exposed to higher platforms, if you want to be a leader, you must also accept to be led at some stage. It can't be that every time that, no, it's me here. I'm in control every time there's a leadership issue. It's me. President Zuma was a member of the Executive Council and MEC in the KwaZulu-Natal government, which was not led by a party that he belonged to for many years. Despite being an official of the African National Congress, despite having weekly meetings with the head of state, with President Mandela and all of those things, after that, back to KwaZulu-Natal. And then in 1997, he was elected as the Deputy President of the African National Congress. The president was Mr. Thabo Mbeki. And during his time, he allowed to be led. Even when he was undermined, given lesser responsibilities, treated with disdain by President Mbeki and his lieutenants. The abuse of President Zuma happened when he was the deputy president of the ANC. Left, right, and center. All sorts of charges concocted against him. Threatened with imprisonment every day. Appointed Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa in 1999. and later on got fired in a humiliating way. When he was deputy president of the Republic, President Mbeki took all the powers which he had himself as deputy to President Mandela, and possibly left President Zuma with the convening the South African National AIDS Council. But the strategic powers which Mr. Mbeki had when he was a deputy president were shifted away. He undermined, denigrated him, and later on said, you are potentially going to be charged in a court of law because you are potentially corrupt or you are corrupt. So I'm removing you as a deputy president of the Republic of South Africa. And even that period, he still operated within the organization with humility and did his work as a leader of the movement. And a lot of people were treating President Zuma during that period like he has got leprosy. You know, in the Bible, Archbishop, and the people who had leprosy were isolated. And a large number of people got to isolate him during that period and say, no, this one is not wanted by chief. And we all know that in the 2007 52nd conference of the ANC, he was elected as the president of the African National Congress. The decisive margin. The margin was more than 1,000 votes of the delegates that were there. I was there. And we were celebrating his election that time. And you know, this is what happens. 2007, he's elected president. 2008, we at that time get elected as the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress Youth League. And those of us who were elected as the National Executive Committee of the ANC Youth League were all of us who were associated and supported President Zuma, all of us. And then in September 2008, the National Executive Committee of the ANC takes a correct decision to recall former President Mbeki as the head of state and president. And you know, many people say it was a mistake. It was not a mistake. I was, that time, in Luthuli House full time. Spent 5 years in Luthuli House full time. I was the national spokesperson of the ANC Youth League. So we naturally would participate in all gatherings of the ANC. The arrogance and the disdain that President Mbeki showed on the ANC leadership that time was unparalleled, was just unacceptable. There was no way the National Executive Committee was not going to recall him. Do you know, at the beginning of each year, there must be a luhutla that discusses of the ANC what government must implement. You will come there and say, no, we cannot release some of these documents to you guys because these are top secret. Cabinet is going to decide. He had created a dichotomy between the ANC and government that time, 2008. And then the National Executive Committee of the ANC took a correct decision to recall him as the head of state and president. Even when President Mbeki was recalled, when President Zuma was the president, he did not say that I'm going to enter now. He didn't do that. He said, no, let's take Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe to be an acting president. Me, I will come in my own accord. I'm going to be elected by the people of South Africa. I'm not going to enter through a corner like this one who is a head of state now, who entered in 2018 through the corner. By himself, he was unable to get more than 50% of the vote. But President Zuma said, I'm the president of the ANC. I'm going to go and campaign for me to be elected as the president of the country. And he went on the ground to campaign. And we can say this without any fear of contradiction. As an attempt to stop President Zuma from being a head of state and president, President Mbeki associated with the formation of COPE, the Congress of the People, that time. He was the demigod, he was the one. That is why the entirety of his cabinet, all his lieutenants, went to join COPE with the hope that they will stop the rise of President Jacob Zuma as a head of state and president. With COPE in existence, COPE which had former ministers, it had multimillionaires who had benefited from the BEE of Thabo Mbeki. It had a former deputy president of the country, Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka. They could not stop the rise of President Zuma that time because the people of South Africa understood President Jacob Zuma. They knew who he is and that he is one with the people. Do you know, if you read elections properly and then you count one by one, Prof, the number of people who voted for President Zuma to be president, they are just slightly lower than those who voted for President Mandela. But President Mbeki, anyone else who has ever led the ANC, has never received the highest number of voters than President Zuma. And these are the realities that got to define just what got to happen. Now, comrades, we're going to allow Professor Sipho to speak about the so many achievements that he achieved when he was head of state and president. But one thing that we know is that when he was head of state and president, the life expectancy of ordinary South Africans increased by more than 10 years. When he was head of state and president, the doors of learning and culture were opened. The number of no-fee schools were increased under President Zuma. When he was head of state and president. When he was head of state and president of the country, he kept peace. You will know historically he had negotiated the peace in Burundi. But there was no conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Why? Because President Zuma paid particular attention to the Democratic Republic of Congo. You know, when he deployed the ground forces to go and keep peace in the DRC, he also had an Air Force base behind the ground forces. Air Force base, South Africa has got the biggest and most sophisticated air capacity in terms of military. And the rebels knew that if you touch the South African peacekeepers or peacekeeping mission, you won't be able to counter the Air Force. That is why during his presidency, there was peace in the DRC. And he used to go himself to speak to the soldiers on the ground and inspire them and explain to them the necessary vision of keeping the DRC and the entirety of the African continent safe. The reason why South Africa has lost 14 soldiers now in the eastern part of the DRC is because there is no more air capacity to counter the rebels. Because Ramaphosa has surrendered the military capacity of South Africa, everywhere else is supposed to find expression. So South Africa is vulnerable to even village armies, to even security companies. They can just intimidate our soldiers because we do not have the capacity which President Zuma got to build. But also President Zuma empowered black people. It's not a secret even statistically. You can prove that more and more black people were getting richer and their lives getting better under President Zuma. The most strategic thing that was done by President Zuma, which we explained earlier, was to join Brics. To have to know who are our friends at a global level. Now, comrades, between the 22nd and 28th of March, we had a meeting of the National High Command. I'm closing now. So, in an atypical way, in an unusual way, you know, a meeting of the National High Command must start with the address, political report or address by the president. Then he said we must read the organizational report first and then you will come in later. So the organizational report had come with a political section and then administrative issues, organization, all the fraternal organizations, what's happening with the Women's League, Youth League, Student Movement. And he sat there to listen to members of the National High Command to talk about Umkhonto weSizwe, the party, and to talk about Umkhonto weSizwe, the movement. He listened for the whole day. The next day he listened up until lunchtime. And then he came, he says that, why is it that you as members of the National High Command are talking, but you're not talking about taking power? Can't you realize the urgency of taking power now? Our people are suffering. Our people are hopeless. He addressed us to say that as Umkhonto weSizwe, we must talk as to how do we take power and how do we take power now? And then he said a very clear agenda. He says that before the end of this meeting, I want you to come with clearly defined 5 or 6 or whatever number of priority areas of discussion as to how do we take power here in South Africa. That is why we came with the 5 areas. One, which is the Umkhonto weSizwe revolutionary path to state power. So what that means is that because currently our path to power involves elections, there must never be a meeting of Umkhonto weSizwe where we do not discuss our path to power. You know, the word path to power is familiar for those who read South Africa's political literature. It was a title of a South African Communist Party document called South African Path to Power. I think it was issued in 1989 in the Havana Congress of the South African Communist Party, where President Zuma was elected as a Politburo member of the SACP. And later on, for tactical reasons, because he was at the center, was advised to step out of the leadership of the SACP to focus on the ANC, because he was at the core of the talks before talks. So in Mkhonto we see that the primary focus now is MK's revolutionary path to state power. 2, we must define as activists, as structures of Mkhonto we see, as to who are our domestic, strategic and tactical friends. So as a branch of Mkhonto we see, as a sub-region of Mkhonto we see, as a region of Mkhonto we see, you must sit down and talk who are the people we should have strategic and tactical alliances with. Which ones? Here in Johannesburg. Here in Johannesburg. Here in Gauteng province. Comrade Convener, you must know which are the largest black constituted institutions and formations here in Gauteng province. There's a gathering in Zubercom this coming Easter. There's a gathering in Orlando Stadium this coming Easter. What is the role of Mkhonto we see in those gatherings, and what are those gatherings? There are so many gatherings that are taking place where our people are. What is the strategic and tactical relationship that Mkhonto we see is going to have with all these formations of black people? And in our characterization of the domestic, strategic and tactical alliances and friends, we even took time to give characterization of other political formations. Some are enemy forces, some are contested opponents. And you know, you must understand that an enemy you crush, but an opponent you persuade to see things the way you see them. That is what we learn from President Zuma. He says that even in PMP, even Untlanyo, just persuade that this is the direction we are taking as a movement. We must not be impatient with anyone. We must be able to relate with each other. That is what we learn from our Commander General, Commander Mhlanganyelwa Gedlehlekisa Zuma. The other aspect, comrades, is who are our friends at a global level, at an international level. Of course, we've got friendship, which we must enhance and harness with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and all the progressive countries. But a fresh, clearer resolution which Mkhonto we see National High Command has taken is that we must foster meaningful and mutually beneficial relationship with the progressive anti-colonial countries and forces in the Sahel region of the continent. We must associate with Burkina Faso and Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Long live Ibrahim Traoré, long live. And we must associate with the progressive forces Mali. Of course, we want democratic change of government, but the overthrow of the puppet regimes of France in the Sahel region was progressive. We will associate as well with what we hope and believe will be a progressive government in Gabon. There's elections today in Gabon. And we wish that the progressive forces must emerge to intensify the struggle for total emancipation. Comrades, we must never be ashamed of President Zuma. He is a revolutionary. He is one of our own. He is us and we are him. No one must make you doubt about that. They've tried everything to bury him. He's still standing. And the people of South Africa understand President Zuma. The people of the African continent understand President Zuma because he is one with the people. We were in Namibia now to inaugurate Commander Triple N. The people of Namibia, when they introduced the head of state of South Africa, they just looked at him and were shocked of what's happening, what is this? But when they introduced President Zuma, the people of Namibia, they said, here is our president, here is our leader, here is the leader of the revolution, here is the leader of true Pan-Africanism. So comrades, all of us must never be ashamed of our president. And the best honor we can give to him is to remain disciplined, is to remain respectful, is to be honest, is to do hard work for the organization. So comrades, thank you very much. The professor is going to come and speak about the movement. Amanda! Long live President Zuma, long live! Long live President Jacob Zuma, long live! Long live President Jacob Zuma, long live! Long live President Jacob Zuma, long live! Batulenje bazitiniso awulendawo sikukuyo Batulenje bazitiniso awulendawo sikukuyo awuskoke Sholoze awulendawo sikukuyo awuskokelem sholoze awulendawo sikukuyo batulenje baztiniso awulendawo sikukuyo batulenje bazitiniso awulendawo sikukuyo waphetes bames tumlilo awulendawo sikukuyo waphetes bames futumlilo awulendawo sikukuyo Amanda, program director.